Hello, and welcome to the Power of Attorney podcast. I am your host, LeTonya Moore. In today's episode, we will be talking about 5 agreements that you never knew that you needed. Now, entrepreneurs, this is by far one of the most important episodes I think that you could listen to in our podcast history because oftentimes entrepreneurs find challenges when growing their businesses, right? You have financial challenges, you have some manpower challenges, access to information, educational courses, so on and so forth, right? The first thing that you think about is, who am I going to get to help me, right? You enlist the help of others to move your business along the growth track. And listen, networking is absolutely phenomenal. So I'm not going to talk about not networking, but I am going to talk about some challenges though, because these 5 agreements that we're going to talk about, the average entrepreneur never thinks about the fact that they need them, or if they do, they don't think about the wide variety of situations where they really need to put these agreements in place to start that foundational level of brand protection. The other thing is that entrepreneurs tend to fail to formalize the agreements, right? Because there's a misconception that if there's no money exchanging hands, we don't necessarily have to have a written agreement. You have to always remember it is still a transaction, right? It's still a transaction. You are getting a benefit for a service rendered, or you are getting a service rendered for some type of benefit. So you have to understand every single thing that you do, every transaction has a monetary component that is attached to it. There is a monetary value, right? Even if it's just ownership value. So again, understand that every transaction and interaction with vendors, potential partners, clients, they all create some level of a legal obligation to perform, either on your part or on the part of others. So I want to jump right in and talk about these 5 agreements that you never thought about needing. 1, fee for service, right? Oftentimes, we will enlist the services of a photographer, a graphic designer, a copywriter, so on and so forth, right? You could name every type of vendor that you could deal with. But here's the thing. You want to make sure that you go beyond the invoice that talks about the payment terms. It talks about how many revisions you're going to get, talks about delivery, all of those things. And although those things need to be in an agreement, right, there are also other things that you need to consider. So you need to make sure that you have the proper fee for services agreement in place. Do not use the same fee for services agreement for every single vendor, because the reason that you don't want to do that is because your relationship to each vendor is going to be different. So you want to make sure that you understand you need a fee for services agreement anytime that you are getting services from a vendor that is outside of your business, right? Now, this is not someone that you have on staff, right? This is not someone that is working with your company all the time. This is just a one-off type of situation. Again, we're talking graphic designers, we're talking copywriters, we're talking graphic designers, and all of those things. You need to make sure that you have some type of fee for services agreement in place, and it needs to go beyond the invoice. Second, non-disclosure agreement. Oftentimes people say, okay, well, if I'm pitching my idea to an investor, or if I'm pitching the idea to a potential partner, yes, maybe we need to have a non-disclosure agreement. Nobody thinks about the planning sessions, right? Because we've had people come to our office and say, well, I didn't want to scare them off. And so I didn't get them to sign a non-disclosure, even though they knew that they should have had a non-disclosure in place because they had an absolutely freaking phenomenal idea. But here's the thing. You have to have the confidence to say, my brand is worth it, right? You have to say, my brand is worth it. And so when you're dealing with investors, when you're dealing with collaborators, even volunteers, when you are dealing with anyone that is going to have access to the information regarding your idea, your concept, your brand, you need to make sure that you have a non-disclosure agreement, which again, you could also achieve the same thing with a confidentiality agreement. Those two things tend to be interchangeable depending on if you're talking about someone that's internal and someone that's external. The other thing, a non-compete. Almost no one has this outside of the internal employment relationship. They don't think about this when they have a, for lack of a better word, right, loosey-goosey arrangement with people and they're coming together and they're doing this event or they're doing this one-off thing. They don't really think about having a non-compete or agreement. And the non-compete agreement basically says, once our relationship is over, you can't now go and do the same thing in the same area, right? Or in the same, let's just say the same metro area, the same city. Now, of course, one caution, you can't prevent the person from doing it like in the world, right? Because at the end of the day, you're not competing in the same market. So you have to think about the non-compete in that manner, right? We're not competing in the same market. So therefore, I can't necessarily prevent you from doing that. Now, I would say if it's something that is on a national scale, a national tour, a national conference, you guys are pulling from the same pool, I think that you can make the argument that your non-compete would be eligible on that level. That's beyond the scope of today's podcast. But I just wanted to put that out there to say there are a lot of intricacies with the non-compete. And so you want to make sure that you are well aware of what those are. But for purposes of today's conversation, this may be a contract that you did not know that you needed, right? Here's a biggie, right? I've done tons of these after talking to my clients who were in really bad situations. So here's the thing, a barter agreement. Lots of folks don't even know that barter agreements even exist because you have to remember you are exchanging goods and services for a benefit, right? Those goods and services, goods or services, have a monetary value attached to them. Remember, I told you guys at the top of the podcast, it doesn't matter that there's not an exchange of cash, right? Or I don't know, Bitcoin, right? Crypto. It doesn't matter that it's not that type of exchange. If there is an exchange of products or services, they have a monetary value attached, okay? If you are exchanging sweat equity for something, you need to make sure that you have an agreement in place. If you are exchanging a service for a service, you need to make sure that you have the agreement in place because you have to treat this as if it is monetary services. Now, here's the thing. The monetary value is not the same. Well, let me say this. The monetary cost is not the same as the value or the benefit. What does that mean? That means that you may be in a barter arrangement and your retail amount for your services may be $10,000 or $15,000. What you're getting from the other person may be $6,000 or $7,000. But that doesn't mean that it's not an equal value exchange, right? Because value is based on what your perception of the value of the services are based on what you are getting, the benefit that your business is getting by working with this particular vendor. You still need to have a barter agreement in place. Fifth, a collaboration agreement. Please have a collaboration agreement in place. What is the difference between a collaboration agreement and a barter agreement? Now, we go in deep detail about this in my book, How to Stop Brand Stealing Thieves. We do go in detail, but for purposes of today's podcast, you need to make sure that you have a collaboration agreement in place, because typically in a collaboration instance, there is some monetary exchange. Even if it is someone is pooling resources, money to pay for a venue or pay for advertising or pay for marketing or pay for trinkets, right? There is some type of monetary outlay versus just a direct exchange of goods and services or an exchange of sweat equity. Those are the differences. The main difference, of course, there are some other intricacies with regard to the barter agreement and the collaboration agreement. The other thing too is the collaboration agreement, typically there is an end in mind. So like, for example, we are coming together in this exchange for a certain thing. It could be an event, it could be a podcast, right? It could be some type of launch, right? It could be anything where the two brands are coming together to do something outside of what the agreement calls for, meaning outside of the goods and services exchange. So that's another distinction between your barter agreement and your collaboration agreement. I cannot stress enough that these 5 agreements are, to me, by far the starting point for protecting your business from the inside out. These are the things when you are armed with these, you have now let anyone that you talk to, you're letting them on notice that you are here to do real business, right? This is not willy-nilly potluck talk, right? This is real business, and you are committed to protecting your brand from the inside out. And so I want to encourage you guys, for those of you that are in these type of relationships, talk to your counterpart and say, look, we need to put something in writing just so we know what we're doing. Make sure that you sign those contracts, right? Make sure you sign those agreements before you start to make those exchanges, because oftentimes it's very difficult to enforce, although you can, but it's very difficult to enforce the arrangement if you don't have those arrangements signed. So you want to make sure that you have all those things done. Also, for those of you that need to, maybe you don't have access to a local attorney, or you're just not sure what type of agreement you need, you can certainly check out some of our sample agreements. You can get the sample agreements online. You can also schedule a consultation with us. You can go to iprotectyourbrand.com for that information. Guys, this is imperative. I cannot stress that enough. Make sure that you reduce all of these things to a writing. Don't wait until something happens to try to then come and be reactive. I am encouraging you to be proactive versus reactive. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to the Power of Attorney podcast. I am your host, LeTonya Moore. Please like our Facebook page, Power of Attorney with LeTonya Moore. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, and YouTube. Until next time, I'm Attorney LeTonya Moore, encouraging you to leverage your power and protect your brand.